You're listening to For Real Radio with Bria, Julia, Kayla, and Michael on WHIT Radio.org, the sound of Hudson County Schools of Technology in North Bergen, New Jersey. All right, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to For Real Radio, a place for the truth. We have a very special show for you all today. We have a nice guest with us, Mr. Jefferson. I'm sure students from high tech certainly know who he is. So we're very happy to have him here.
Well, I'm pleased to be here.
There we go. Okay, and we have a special show to go along with it. Today's show is going to be focusing on two things. We have women's rights then and now, and we also would like to make a few parallels between prohibition and today's marijuana controversy. So let's start with prohibition. Let's really get down what prohibition was and where it started. So let's talk about women's temperance. Mr. Jefferson, what exactly is women's temperance and the women's temperance movement?
Well, the movement starts around 1875 in the Mountain West, near Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, and the mining towns. Women were upset with the domestic situations at home. Men would come home from their mining jobs, waste their money in the saloons, come home and abuse their families, and abuse children and abuse wives. And women naturally were not all too pleased with that. So they organized enough people, fellow women, usually fellow abuse sufferers and victims, petitioned the government in Wyoming for the right to vote, received the right to vote, and proceeded to ban alcohol. They believed that alcohol was the root of the problem rather than the job, like working a very difficult job in the mine. The alcohol was the evil rather than the job, which is interesting. And
we found out with the ratification of the 18th Amendment and the making the U.S. dry that apparently alcohol was not the problem after all. What exactly was the problem? It seems as if prohibition caused more trouble than it was meant to, than good that it did. What were some of the flaws that came with prohibition?
Well, number one, it's impossible to go house to house and arrest people for making bootleg liquor in their house. If you had the manpower to do that, where would you put all these offenders and violators? There's no prison on the planet big enough. You'd have to do what the British did and move everyone to an island, Australia. On top of that, the government doesn't have the right to come into my house unless it has a signed search warrant from a judge or exigent circumstances. If there's somebody in my house screaming, "Don't kill me," then they can break down my door. But unless they have evidence and proof that I'm doing something wrong, I still have the Fourth Amendment on my side, and you can't break down my door. If you do and you take my bootleg liquor, okay, maybe you can take it, but that is evidence that you cannot use in my trial unless you have a search warrant. But there's something more about the social conditions that lead to alcoholism and the biological conditions that lead to alcoholism that's important to talk about and important to understand, because the early temperance people didn't even talk about these things. They just said, "Please, Mr. Husband, don't beat me up. That's bad," rather than, "Hey, Mr. Government, give my husband a decent wage. Give me a fair wage, a living wage. Give me an incentive not to drink." The government says, "Well, that's not my job. That's your problem. It's your family. Your life. You live it your way. Just don't beat anybody up."
Right. So obviously there were social aspects that could not be changed by the ratification of the 18th Amendment.
Well, but if the social conditions are fixed, society loses. If you're really paid what you believe you're worth, and what you believe that you're entitled to, there's no way the system can sustain that. I think I'm worth $1,000 a day. Nobody can afford me.
There you go.
And I'm sure Kayla and yourself and Julie think the same thing. Maybe you think you're worth $2,000. That's $750,000 a year. Nobody could afford that. So we're stuck with what's out there rather than what we want. We have to settle for what we can get rather than go for what we want, because what we want is not really out there. It's the dream, not the reality.
Right. So we saw some of the social consequences of prohibition. Obviously, we have an increase in crime. We have a crime wave. We heard of gangsters like Al Capone. But what was the financial impact on the country?
Taxes at that time weren't all very high as they are now, so the government didn't lose as much money as you might if prohibition happened today. The taxes on alcohol are through the roof. Alcohol is not all that expensive to make, even pleasant tasting alcohol. Even what sells for hundreds of dollars a bottle in the liquor store is not that expensive to make. Corn is cheap. Corn is the cheapest thing because corn is America's biggest product. And with corn you can make whiskey. With potatoes you can make vodka. With apples and flowers you can make other stuff. Gin, with sugar cane you can make rum. They're all cheap stuff. You can grow them in plantations. Millions and millions of acres of that stuff distilled and fermented into millions and millions of barrels worth of liquor, which is trillions and trillions of bottles worth of stuff. But back then the taxes on alcohol weren't all that big. The government didn't lose a lot of money. But the financial stuff was more about a byproduct of the side effect of prohibition. The crime that happens with the mafia in Boston and New York City and Chicago and the big areas, owning the speakeasies and then controlling other things. Al Capone got himself involved with the other Chicago gangsters, Meyer Lansky and Dutch Schultz and Bugsy Siegel in theft, murder for hire and stuff like that. And that's where you get into the really costly crime. Right. There's a real tangible cost, but then there's the hidden cost behind it. The economy takes a blow with one person in the system dying. That person is no longer productive. The company loses. If we have a big birth rate and a slow death rate, we can afford to put that work back in the system. But if we don't, then the system loses. So there's a hidden cost to this.
Well, listening to this, I can't realize, and knowing what's going to happen, 1929 rolls around, and this the start of something pretty tragic in the country. How much of an impact did Prohibition have on and lead to and cause the Great Depression?
Not much. Prohibition has almost nothing to do with the stock market collapsing. The stock market collapsing is a weird thing because what you look at today as a collapse, Dow Jones Industrial Average, which is only 30 stocks out of more than 100,000 stocks, only 30 stocks. If the market lost 1,000 points today, it would be a disaster.
Right.
That's 1/15 of what the market is worth today because it just hit 15,000. But in October of 1929, the stock market went from 431 points and it lost like 35 points. It lost a little bit, like 10%. But it's such a small number. There were 12 stocks in the Dow Jones at that time. But the idea of the panic sets in, and the byproduct becomes worse than what actually happened in the first place. The stocks that dropped were, almost meaningless stocks. But the banks who had spent their money, the investors' money investing in the stocks, had a panic. There was the idea of panic, and that fuels a real panic. Sometimes the cure is worse than the disease.
Right. Yeah. All right. So we did clear that up. That really, one didn't lead to the other. It's really not fair to say that Prohibition had a real big dent in the cause of the Depression. So that's
no,
good.
But the reverse is true. That the way out of the Depression was to tax alcohol, bring it back, and then tax it.
Which,
especially because families are, and if you're a keen sociologist, you see this. If you look around the areas that are not so wealthy, the two big things that the stereotypically poor people usually have are cigarettes and alcohol. They're not covered in Families First or food stamps, but somehow the poor people always have cigarettes and alcohol.
I always see that when when the people who walk on the highway or something, and they have this cup and they ask for money in each car, but they always wind up with a cigarette in their hand, or they have a bottle in their hand. I'm just okay.
How'd you get the
they have
cigarette?
money for that, right?
Yeah.
Right. Well,
it's probably because they had some sort of addiction.
Well, that's what we can assume. But I live in Bayonne, and we have a few complexes there that aren't of the highest income. Not gonna lie. And what really grinds my gears is when I see a nice new Mercedes parked right in the parking lot. Now you can speculate as to causes, how some people use welfare, but drugs are definitely an issue too, which I think you can make a couple easy parallels between prohibition and today's marijuana controversy and the different opinions on both sides. The thing is, I've heard the argument, okay, we have alcohol, why can't marijuana be legal? And I think that's a common wall that no one has yet to find a way over or around. What do you guys think?
This is from a female perspective. What do you think, Kayla?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Marijuana.
Two.
Let's
Three.
go.
4.
Do you think it should be legalized or not? Let's and back it up.
See, you're the perfect person to ask because you're an impressionable, young, stereotypical teenager in this age of visual and audio bombardment with stuff. Rap artists that you know, rock artists that you know, talk about drugs and glorify drugs, more now than almost ever.
Right.
What do you think as a person?
I don't think it should be legal. I mean, even if you do it,
Really?
people still find a way around it to do it.
Right.
Like, I don't think it should be legal because it's just going to enforce, people to do it younger and younger. So, I mean, I don't think it should be legal.
Okay.
Well, if marijuana was legal, would you smoke it?
No.
Why not? You got the right answer. Just why not?
Just because I wouldn't
It's not
do
healthy.
It. Yeah.
Because it's morally
Is-
frowned upon.
I
Is
think-
it really not healthy, though?
Yes,
Yeah,
it's really not
healthy.
healthy.
It's
I mean,
has
marijuana
has 20 times the carcinogenics
Right.
of a cigarette.
and the smoke itself, the pure marijuana smoke itself is more more harmful and it's more harsh than tobacco smoke. There are just smoking anything is not enforced. You notice they don't sell joints, they sell marijuana and some of its pure forms, which can be used different ways, but they don't actually enforce smoking it. I've heard of vapor, and I've heard of teas, but I know
You could bake it into food too.
you can bake it, brownies. We've all heard of that. But I know smoking it is definitely not good for you.
So even if you don't smoke it, is it still a good idea? You hit upon something with the morally frowned upon stuff.
Right.
But that's something you learned from someone else.
Right.
Is marijuana by itself worthwhile, even if you don't smoke it?
Right.
Even if you can put it into a vaporizer and just inhale the vapor or,
Right.
or cook it and, get around the carcinogens by letting it on fire, is it still a good idea?
Well, it does kill neurons. There have been studies. It does kill neurons.
But there's no overdose. It
The-
does kill neurons, but there's no way to have a lethal overdose of it.
Well, not that I've seen. I don't know any cases of a lethal overdose of marijuana, but I do know its long-term negative effects, and obviously, I think that enough.
Alcohol has long-term negative effects.
It absolutely
as well.
does, and there's
Every
the
single thing
wall
does.
that we can't get over, right? That and that's the problem, But I think the reality is, if it let's say it's common at like your corner store. Let's talk hypothetically. That is a lot more convenient to get than calling up your buddy and going to meet him wherever to make try to make some kind of surreptitious exchange. So there is definitely a case of, okay, it's inconvenient to get, and that dissuades me from actually going out to get it. People are going to get it. We know that people are going to get anything as soon as they're told that they can't have it. But making it more convenient to get, I'm not sure is the right answer.
Yeah, I would be against just making it legal for everyone. But if it was like alcohol, you have to make a certain age or some type of restriction
There's
on
limits.
it. Then yeah.
Right.
Well,
Absolutely.
Even if the drinking age in this country is 21, maybe in Canada it's 19, and England it's 16 for beer and wine, does alcohol do anything good for you? Every so often I hear, and I only know what you guys know. I'm not a fan of alcohol at all. maybe a glass of red wine every day does something to improve heart circulation, then it seems like 6 weeks later the opposite is true. A brand new study says alcohol is worse for you, doesn't help your heart, it just hurts other stuff. So where's the truth? Where's the benefit to alcohol? Forget about the social stuff. The social stuff is manufactured. But where's the biological reason for alcohol or marijuana or any other substance?
Right.
And where does the good outweigh the bad?
Right. And what I've heard a lot of causes and a lot of reasoning for like the consumption of red wine or something like that is it contains something called resveratrol, which is supposed to be really rich in antioxidants, cancer-fighting antioxidants. But the thing is, you can get that same chemical from like a glass of grape juice or grapes, and to have the amount of resveratrol that would be beneficial over time, you would have to drink like 3 glasses of red wine a day, and that's canceling out its benefits anyway, because at that point you're hurting your liver.
So you'd have
really
a great
bad.
heart, bad kidneys, and bad liver.
Bad kidneys, bad liver. But no, I think today the debate on marijuana use is definitely, we're going to see change. It's going to have to come to a point where a decision is going to have to be made, either for or against.
So is this like the new prohibition?
Is this like the new? It could be.
Wait, wouldn't legalizing it like help the economy or something?
That's the other argument.
You know what I like is to watch the Budweiser commercials, and everybody's partying and drinking down the beer, and then they have a little disclaimer at the end of the commercial: drink responsibly.
Yeah.
You know, okay. After like you
Right.
know about the 7th beer, I'll think about it.
Kayla's got an interesting thing about the tax question here. If you legalize it, you could tax it.
Right.
Okay, well, what about moonshine? What incentive is there for a grower of marijuana to submit to government enforcement of the taxes?
Absolutely. No, of course, because they don't want to. They certainly don't want to lose any profit in it either.
Even if you look at it from a strictly economical perspective,
Right.
whatever cost I as a grower have, I must pass on to my customers because I'm not paying out of my profits.
Right.
That's not how I succeed. That's how I fail in business. So whatever amount of marijuana there used to be in a dime bag is now going to be smaller. So the customer loses this. And what's to say that the customer doesn't want to grow his own? If I can, it's possible. It's illegal, but it's possible for me to make wine in my basement. It's possible for me to make gin in my kitchen, whiskey in my kitchen. If I have the corn, if I have the right kind of mix of other stuff, if I can make sour mash. You can watch the things on different documentaries on the Discovery Channel, how to make homemade liquor. Watch the moonshine stuff. The History Channel has the stuff. You can make it at home. The government can't bust on my door. I have the 4th Amendment on my side. I didn't pay taxes on that stuff. I game the system. There's no incentive for me to pay taxes. And part of the argument may be if the government taxes it, it may tax it so high that it may deter the use. But prison sentences didn't deter the use. Why would I be deterred by $10 a pack tax or $10 a bag tax?
Right. No, and that's obviously that's an issue. We see today that the argument for taxing it really doesn't hold as much water as I think a lot of people would like it to. So the real question is, what deters you from smoking marijuana? Is it a moral code that you have, or is it just the fact that you're afraid of consequence?
You mean what stops?
Yeah. What is it? Kayla, okay. Let me ask you the question. Why don't you go out every day and just blaze up? Fair enough question. Is it health or all of the above?
Not health.
Okay.
Maybe just like a moral thing, like it's not right, so you
Okay.
don't do it.
All right. Now, do you have any corner stores around your area? Well, I'm sure you do. You
Yep.
can find one anywhere. What if you found out that your local corner store was now supplying marijuana, like it supplies cigarettes, and it's now legal for you to buy it? would you do it?
I mean, just like I don't smoke cigarettes, I wouldn't do that either.
Okay. Fair enough.
Would it make a difference if you could buy the marijuana and consume it without the carcinogens?
Without the what?
Without smoking it, if you could put it in a bong and inhale the vapor, which is...
So instead of smoking, just bake it or do whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And of course, no one wants to.
The wheels are turning.
Right.
So you've got to think about that one.
And on air, no one wants to come out and say, "Oh yeah, I would get high all the time," because it's something that's not accepted now. It's something that isn't legal.
Mr. Jefferson, our Kayla is a very deep thinker, so you have to count to
Yeah.
2 or 3 times.
She is. She is a deep thinker.
Right.
Yeah.
And I also think when we think about something like this, we have to, put aside that people don't, and a good majority of people don't believe in everything in moderation, right? Because then you would eliminate the dangers for a lot of things, marijuana, alcohol. If someone said, okay, I'm going to have 1 drink every 2 weeks with a meal, we'd be fine.
Must be on drugs to think like that.
and what if you said, okay, I'm going to have 1 joint a month. That's it. That's what, 12 joints a year.
I understand that defeats the whole purpose of it. We don't live in a culture that says moderation. We live in a culture that says excess.
Right.
We live in the rock star culture. Don't just have a job that pays you $10 an hour. Go for the Donald Trump money.
Right.
Millions and millions of dollars.
Absolutely.
Why buy a car? Why buy a Chevy, a Trailblazer when you can, buy a Bentley?
Right.
When's the last time you saw a successful guy, besides maybe Warren Buffett, dressed in Kmart clothing, driving a used car?
Right. Absolutely. And I think
conspicuous consumption.
Right. That's why you won't see a sweeping decision on the legalization of marijuana, because you have to think in terms of the American citizen. You have to think in terms of human nature itself. You give someone a foot, they want a yard. So that's why I think you haven't you haven't seen a decision like that. All right. Wow. We certainly
aired it out.
Right, we pontificated for a while. All right, that's going to end today's show. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to For Real Radio, a place for the truth. We'll be back with you next time.
Very cool. We got to do this together.